first question, we just want to ask sort of what brought you to Palestine organizing in the first place, and how did you end up finding yourself here on this panel today?
So I'm Palestinian American. My dad was born in Palestine, and they left when he was a small child during the Six-Day War because the Israelis invaded our village. And so at that time, my grandmother, who was by herself, had to make a really hard decision, which was, stay or potentially die. Because the memory of 1948 was still present in their minds. And so they moved to Kuwait. My family and my dad grew up there for most of his childhood, and then he eventually came to the States where he met my mom. And then I grew up in Portland most of my life, and I came to Palestine organizing when I was in high school, when I started to read Edward Said, basically. And he sort of introduced me to this history and this history of resistance, and so I was like, I have to do something. And when I got to Portland State, luckily Students United for Palestinian Equal Rights had just been created in 2009, mostly as a response to the 2008 war on Gaza. And since then, I've just been dedicated to educating myself and also dedicating myself to this struggle because I have so much privilege as a Palestinian American here, with basically not facing a lot of the repercussions that Palestinians my age receive in Palestine, as you can tell. So that's sort of how I came to it.
I am also Palestinian American. I was born and raised here in Oregon. I went back to Ramallah when I was about to start high school, so I spent most of high school in Palestine. That was kind of my turning point, where seeing everything firsthand. I grew up watching the second Intifada on TV. My earliest childhood memories of Palestine were watching Muhammad al-Qurra get slain while his father protected him, and he was around my age at the time. And that had a big impact on me. Those are things that you don't need to watch again to see them. And it's still to this day, I see it all the time every time I think about Palestine, Palestinian children, and the privilege that I live in here, being able to be an activist and my drive for it. I began organizing when I started Shemeketa Community College. I was working in the Multicultural Center, and during the time there wasn't really anybody organizing anything for Palestine in that area. It started with little things like cultural nights. People from Corvallis would come to those events. And then later I went to UW. I was doing software engineering, and so it was kind of, there's not much you would do outside of that when you're doing engineering. I ended up coming back to Oregon, and I came into Super, and a lot of my organizing and all the things I've progressed in have been through Super. I've been educated through Super, through my organizing with them. Events we put on like this is where I got all my information, and interacting with everybody else, tabling in the park blocks, interacting with just so many different people on campus, and that kind of brought me here.
So my dad is Palestinian, and so I'm half Palestinian, and my mom is from Afghanistan. So I grew up, when people ask like how did I start organizing for Palestine, I was kind of like born into it. So, there's that general rhetoric at home where it's like, this may like sound
derogatory in a certain way, but I'm just gonna say it. Like my parents would just always say, "Allah yakhrab bayt al-Yahudiya." Like that was always just there. That just was something a part of our upbringing. So to say, we just knew from the moment we were young, you know, free Palestine. We went to all the protests in Portland all the time from a very young age, because as you all know, this has been going on for so long. But to talk about my dad's story, my grandfather from my dad's side actually fled during the Nakba, so that's 1948. And they were, my grandfather brought his wife and they raised a family in Egypt, in Qahira, in Cairo. So most of my family on my dad's side is Masri Palestinian. So, because they were born and raised there. And my dad came here to the States for college. He actually went to OSU. So, and that's where he met my mom. This is not their story. But anyways, so again, talking about how I got into this, I grew in it. So every day, it's like, you know, you go to any Palestinian home, you see Masjid al-Aqsa, you see Qubt al-Sakhra, Dome of the Rock. It's just there. It's a part of your life. And so, you know, I always just knew, you know, we were on the right side. It was fighting for justice. So growing into that, as I started to think critically more about these issues, was really when I stepped into a college campus. And I thought about how can you critically resist Israeli apartheid over a long term, and being such a long-term way, like sustainability, and how to raise critical consciousness about this whole issue. And so I think I'll talk about that more, but yeah, it just kind of became, it's always been a part of my life, but now it's just interconnected in my activism and in everything that I do.
Thank you all for sharing these like quite personal stories, because I think that sometimes we also have to acknowledge that that's not easy, especially if it's such a place to heart, like I assume for you all. So I want to acknowledge that like sharing these personal stories is not necessarily easy in front of even an audience. And our next question kind of ties into more campus organizing, but it can also be kept more general. So we're wondering, what campaigns or like what specific strategies or issues do you all think is most important specifically for college campuses?
I mean, of course, BDS is a really strong campaign right now going on college campuses. There's one in particular that I've also been looking at. It's funded by Black Lives Matter. It's the Reduce to Zero campaign, and it talks about demilitarizing the police and reducing killings by police to zero. They're very precise in every strategy they have for demilitarizing police, from also campuses. You know, we have armed police now on campuses, especially at PSU. That was one of the things that we kind of saw growing on campus, and there was a lot of pushback from students into disarming police on campus. I'm not sure on OSU how it is right now here, but that was also a very strong campaign that was going on there.
And then, just to add to Layla's, one of the most important parts, I think, about doing any sort of campaign on campus is really organizing with other student groups and community organizations. That was one of the things that I think made our campaign on campus really strong, because when we went into the Student Senate hearings for the bill, we were able to have a broad coalition of not only students, but also community members who thought this issue was really important. And I think with the diversity of voices, but also building that connection, like connecting Palestine to Black Lives Matter, connecting Palestine to border technologies that are used to keep people out, all those issues, you know, that's how you build the solidarity, and that's how you come to like other groups. You're like, well, this is directly affecting me, and I know it's directly affecting you. How do we build something together to hold, not just our university accountable, but like other public institutions? Like one example would be Occupation Free Portland. We went to the Portland City Council and asked them, like, well, you have like this sustainability, I think like Human Rights and Sustainability Board, and we were like, well, what are you doing, about Palestine when the City Council has like all these connections to, really bad things, and it forces, Oregon, especially like our liberal cities, to really face, the question of Palestine and like how far does their concern go for not just Palestinians, but for the Black community, for the Latinx community, and all that.
Thank you. So the way I think about this question is that I think that you really first have to understand your campus. So every campus is very different. I'll just say that. And so when you think about Portland State campus, it's so different than Oregon State. There's a lot more, it's in a city, it's in a different place. The geography really matters. So when thinking about Corvallis, I mean, just the demographic, the people. What I first had to step into was a lot of the times I didn't feel like there was any space for that. And so I remember, I think it was my junior year, I realized that, there's always so much going on, in the SJP and on other campuses, so there's always all this, and I always hear what's going on in Portland. But when I thought about organizing on this campus, the first thing was just raising awareness and raising consciousness and actually telling people what is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it's so disappointing that that's sometimes where we're at, is like, here's what's happening, and giving people, just teaching people is a whole nother level of activism, right? Like that's sometimes how we have to enter. So I didn't know where to begin. And I felt very isolated on this campus. So it wasn't actually until, but it was like always in this frame of like asking people if it was okay. So asking people if it was okay if I started something like this. It was never felt like I had the power or agency to really do it. And now looking back, I realized that that's what I was doing, and it's very, it's hard to look back on, but that's what happens when you're in a campus like Oregon State. It's very overrun by white students, and students of color are very isolated, especially, Palestinian students, African-American students. They're all in their own silos, so it's really hard to build consciousness against those networks. So it's first thinking of, okay, we just need community, we just need a place for all of us to come together. But I think it wasn't until I met Azim Husseini, who's the president of Super. It's not supposed to have hierarchies, but collective. But yeah, he's the head honcho right now. But so it wasn't until I met him, and then he's the one who said, we need to do something. And it was my last year, and it was like meeting with someone who had that much passion until we came together and actually made Super, and we sent a Facebook message to the Super in Portland, and then it just kind of happened. And that's kind of the power in like coming together with people. Azim is not Palestinian, he's Indian. And so that's why the Palestinian cause is what Jenna is saying. It's about bringing people together to fight for justice, that's what it is. And taking that lens is so important when thinking about resistance, long-term resistance for Palestine. It's just fighting for justice.
Thank you all so much. Just kind of going off of that, there may be people here who are new to Palestine organizing or just sort of starting to raise their awareness about this, and I just kind of wonder maybe what advice you might have for people who are new to this organizing, this work, if you have any advice for people who are trying to figure out how that they can get involved in the struggle for justice for Palestine.
I think first things first, it's important to educate yourself, obviously. There's so many amazing resources to actually understand, like just the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because so much has happened. And there's so many different waves in the conflict that have happened that have changed the whole politics of just Palestine and the way that they navigate now. And there's so many, and that's why when people say, two-state solution, these kinds of things, it's never that simple, especially with how long this conflict has been going on. So first, like, educating yourself and really doing that critical work, like looking on all sides, right? And then also, when you first start organizing, you also have to think about what's my place in all of this, right? And it's about doing the internal work. And so a lot of the time, when we organize or we do activism, or when I started doing that, it was the internal journey that mattered the most. And that's what we have to think about, like, why are we doing this work? Why are we in this? And it's all about, we're fighting for people's lives. And so we have to think about, what's my place in all of this, and how do I have power and privilege, and where can I insert myself in a way that is healthy and sustainable for myself too. And so there's that duality, and that we should all honor. And so it was taking that process, going through that process, to help me gain full consciousness. And so fighting for something when you don't have a personal connection to, is not as long, it doesn't have as much long-term sustenance. It's not part of your life in the same way. Because then that's why things are treated as a fad. That's why people come and go and are not in it for the long haul, because they don't see it as something they're personally part of their lives. And so, I've seen a lot of people come and go, and people only show up when something happens in Palestine, but then when something else happens, anything in Syria and Yemen, for Black Lives, for DACA, for all these things, where are you then? Because if you're fighting for Palestine, you're fighting for all injustice. And so we're not there. So when you're thinking about how to organize or organizing, you shouldn't just be organizing for Palestine. You should be organizing for every movement that aligns with what the Palestinian struggle is trying to resist. That's colonialism, that's American empire, that's imperialism, all these things, racism. And so it's important to be multifaceted in that approach. And so I just will never understand when someone says free Palestine but is not showing up for Black lives. It doesn't make sense in my mind, because you have to be intersectional. And I'm repeating the same things all these activists are saying too. Nancy Mansour yesterday, for those of you who weren't there, I had no idea she was going to come and talk about all this African presence, Black presence in Palestine, and how they have it, how bad it is for them because they are Black, and that's what we need to recognize. And their invisibility is something we need to recognize, And so that was enlightening, but also heartbreaking in the same space. So how do we center everything we do with bringing the people who are most marginalized to the center? Recentering our approach is, I think, the most critical. I don't even know if I answered the question. Long rant, but.
Well, I guess, for me, I love to read in general, but I educated myself about Palestine through reading books. And I know, as students, that's obviously really, really hard, because you have to read a whole bunch of other stuff besides, this extra stuff about Palestine. But that was really helpful, because it gave me the framework to understand what was happening, not just in Palestine, but also if you're starting a super or an SJP at your campus, there are a bunch of other supers and SJPs throughout the United States, and they all have resources that are available. Some of them have websites, but even just going through their Facebook page, you can find resources, links, videos and whatnot that will really help you understand, what's happening in Palestine and also what other students are doing across the United States. I know that was really helpful for me when I wanted to do events at PSU. I would look to campuses like at UCLA who have a really strong SJP, and they had a whole bunch of really cool events that were happening. They had their BDS campaign that I followed and learned so much from, and so I think following the examples of other activists before us, especially on campus, is really important because it might seem really overwhelming to start something just from scratch, but people have done this before, they'll continue to do it. So just looking at, Super at PSU, Super at UW, SJP UCLA, all of those students are open to helping you. And I know Super at PSU definitely helped out people at UW. UW has helped us, and now I'm here at OSU. So we're all here to help each other and to give each other resources, and I think just taking that small step and reaching out, just see what happens, because you could learn so much just from that.
Starting off, you're going to be alone for a little bit. Back at when I started at Shemekia Community College, and there were a lot of things that happened, and I was basically the only Palestinian there, the only one really trying to do anything. I had incidents where I had put up flyers where I myself was the one responsible for approving flyers and putting the stamp on them. So they had a stamp when I put them on the wall. So I know they were there, they were legit, they were approved, and campus police came and took them down. I found them thrown in the trash, and I was pissed. I went up to the officer and I was like, "Why'd you take these? Why'd you take them down?" And he told me they're not appropriate. I was like, "That's not for you to say." And I made a big deal out of it. Don't be afraid to make a big deal out of it. I took it to administration. I took it and sat down with the president of the college, and I was able to get them to train their police officers on sensitivity training. They needed it, obviously. So don't be afraid to, that's one of the pieces of advice, don't be afraid to stand up and fight back, even if you're alone.
Yeah.
Is it still on? Okay, well, thank you all. These are the first 2 or 3 questions that we had. We have more questions to jump into, but at this point we wanted to open it up to the audience. We're going to walk around with the mics, but if anyone has questions on their note cards, that works in the same way. So have at it. Okay, I don't know, who's first? You or you?
Hi, my name is Brooke, and I'm a faculty member here. And in thinking about BDS campaigns, I actually wrote this down so I can be a little more. So, how do you think about where research dollars come from in thinking about the BDS campaigns? I was at Purdue before, and Purdue is totally tied into Caterpillar. But are you thinking about where research dollars are coming from when you're thinking about moving a campaign forward?
That's a really good question. So I have to think about it for a bit. But in terms of research dollars from businesses or
Purdue gets a lot of money from Caterpillar.
Right.
They have Caterpillar is sitting in Lafayette, Purdue is sitting in West Lafayette. I can't imagine. And I'm sitting in the library, and I have connections to the College of Education. But I hear that engineering is doing stuff with defense, and So I have, and especially with changes like with this current administration, we're going to be seeing dollars coming from different places coming into OSU. And so the idea that trying to move a BDS campaign forward at a university that is getting money that is directly tied to businesses or U.S. government that is directly tied to like Caterpillar. How does that impact? Have you guys thought about this, or have BDS campaigns been successful at universities where there have been strong ties to Zionist supporting organizations?
Yeah, I completely understand what you're trying to say.
Okay.
So Oregon State, for instance, has huge ties to HP.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Here we go.
so, and I think first, and Anique and all of us, we would sit down and we talk about, okay, so which one is feasible, which ones are feasible, and which ones really aren't. And so, we start with the smaller ones. So we started with sabra, hummus. That's something simple, like take that out of the dining halls, And so Azim would sit down with the director or the head of UHDS and have a meeting. And it wasn't, at the end of the day, they told us that they didn't even it wasn't that much percentage that they got from Sabra Hummus, but it was still like a smaller tiered thing that we thought we could tackle right away. And so the work we did with that is like raising awareness on campus and telling them about Sabra, because most people didn't even know, And so we put out flyers, we started a petition, all those things. So tackling it from ways that we felt like we could win. But I understand what you're saying, like the bigger organizations and bigger, influences over the university. That's something that we were kind of at a loss with how to tackle that. And so, if anyone in the audience has, successes of that, I know a lot of different universities have made, public statements of divesting, and that is a huge win in general. But to get like an Oregon State, like a state college, usually liberal arts colleges are more willing to do that. But Oregon State is, and it is hard to gain a lot of backing for that. And so, because we don't have a campus that reflects a lot of those views, and so, kind of pulling the small people who will listen and who will sign the petitions is a lot of work. And so I think that's something that I'm just being being real with like where we are and kind of what OSU is. For God's sakes, it's so frustrating. They don't even make public statements about white supremacists and about, and like doing something about that. And so it's also about, I hate being about that person like waiting till that time comes. Like I don't believe in that, but I'm also saying that it's about being realistic too and understanding the landscape of your campus. And it's going to be harder for those bigger ones like Caterpillar and HP and the bigger corporations that have a stronger pull on college campuses, especially the thing that brings the most revenue to this campus, which is STEM engineering. So yeah, but thank you for asking that.
We have another question over here. Thank you for being here. My name is Awa Barawi, and I'm from the University of Oregon, a recent graduate, and I led the Arab Student Union there for a few years. I am wondering if any of you have received any kind of response or backlash from pro-Israel groups or lobbies, because as you know, they're huge and they're very influential, powerful, a lot of money behind it. If you did receive anything like that, how did you respond, and was it effective or not? Thanks.
Gotten it from everybody. So after BDS, we were all put on Canary Mission. That's one of the biggest things. Like they got profiles for us. It's like this cute little resume minus the terrorist stuff. But I'm still, it was like 2 years ago my profile was put on there, and I don't use Twitter, but I'm still constantly getting tweeted at and harassed like every single day. Lewd, disgusting comments. And it plays a lot into their character. I think all the screenshots I have and everything that's going to go to Pal Legal, it just shows how much, like, how disgusting they can get, how bad it can get, and we've seen the worst. We've had professors come to us at tables, like, standing there alone and, like, coming, charging at us, where's the ruckus? I hear there's, like, a big, like, there's nobody here. Like, who are you coming for? Like, they're acting like it's a big, like, fight or something that's going on, and it's constant. We've gotten approached by J Street, we've gotten approached by, what is it? Chai. We've got Stand With Us. Stand With Us is like completely anti-BDS. They have all these campaigns just targeted at student activists, and I'm pretty sure they're behind Canary Mission, even though nobody really knows for sure who is behind Canary Mission. We've been infiltrated by Zionists. There was somebody who I'm like 90% sure joined the group and collected intel on us and put all this information about us on the sites. So what we do, it can get dangerous, and I mean, you just have to be careful with the information that you share personally about yourself. Don't put your workplace online, because there were people that were getting threats because they posted where they work on Canary Mission. So people were getting threats, and they were telling them they were coming to them at work. Rape threats, there were death threats. So, I mean, we've seen it all. We've gotten all of them. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest backlash is Canary Mission. I think that just because the information they collect is just like, wow, they went like real deep. But what I mean, it's all like intimidation. And I think the biggest thing probably was Stand With Us / Chai on campus, just because like when we did do our BDS campaign, what Stand With Us did was put out a call for every like Zionist in the Pacific Northwest to come to the Portland State campus and basically say the most like vile and like racist, Islamophobic stuff during this hearing, which in the end did help us, but the whole thing is just really horrible just because like we're all Palestinian, and so they're like saying that directly at you while they're like testifying. They're whispering it behind your back, saying like the worst like things, and it can be really triggering for a lot of people. And I would say that was probably like the worst thing that's probably ever happened to me, besides also just like, you know, Zionists like filming our events, like conferences like this, just in general speakers, because it's all a ploy to intimidate you and silence you. And I feel like it's really corny to just be like brave, but you really do have to be brave and be able to confront it, because at the end of the day, they're more scared of us than we are of them. And so like when you fight back, they like turn into like chicken shit, like honestly. Like,
I forgot to add on to like my personal response to them and their Canary Mission is like I took the link to the profile and I put it on my Instagram. So I was like, this doesn't scare me. So like everybody who clicks on it, it's, you know, it's like it gets at them because their intimidation isn't working. If anything, it's driven me even stronger. And I feel that that's everyone who's still part of Super, everyone who's still doing activism organizing, it's actually been a driving force for us. And it's like the internet came to life when we saw all these people come, like, because you see all this stuff on like online and you don't expect it to see it in person, and here they are doing all this crazy stuff in front of you.
Okay, there's so much to say about this. I think first, when we started out doing Palestinian organizing here, we immediately, because the same people who were organizing for Palestine are the same people who are in Muslim Student Association, are the same people working at the cultural center. So it's like this network, right? And so on campus, there's an organization called Halal, and they, at first, you know, very friendly, very, you know, the very great group of students. But I think that it was a lot of like passive, you know, resistance. And so what we had to experience was telling, because I don't know if you all know, but Halal is the Jewish student organization. It's funded by Zionists, and a lot of they're in their whole, part of what they say to each chapter is that they cannot organize with pro-Palestine, and as they say, anti-Israel organizations. So Super falls into that. So I guess. And so they told us that they could not do anything with Super, but they wanted to do things with the MSA. And so that's not just exclusive to our campus. So they do things with the MSA, but then, have very stark views about Israel. About Palestine and Israel. And so, having to sit with that, it's just having to come together in certain moments, but also realizing but you don't believe that Palestine should exist. Having to sit with that was very compromising. And if we get called anti-Semitic one more time, I will lose my shit. Because it's just not true. And it's discounting, the 4 million Jews who have pledged for, the crimes against Palestine, and that's through Jews for Peace, the Jews Voice for Peace, one of the biggest pro-Palestinian organizations. And so it doesn't accurately portray all of the Jewish people, Jewish Arabs, it's making people invisible. And so that was something that we had to deal with a lot. And then when we realized this was not just exclusive to us, this was also happening on other campuses, where coming to Muslim students, but then resisting Palestinian struggle was also, really difficult. But then when we started to be more into BDS, when we started to be more into calling out, OSU's ties to Israel and to different organizations that are pro-Israel, they used their power and leverage to actually go to the OSU administration, and talk about that and say how we were spewing anti-Semitic hate and all these things. And because, some of the super members went and put this out there, they told their story, they put this out there, and they actually went and talked to the OSU administration and did that. So this back channeling, and just shows the power and the influence that they have and the connections that they have, and how that's so starkly different between super and Jewish organizations like Halal. And so that was very alarming, and just showed how important it is to speak up against this. And that's why I'm bringing this up. This is a contentious issue that's happening right now on this campus with Halal and Super. And I was, wondering if I should even talk about it. But I think it's important. I think it's important for us to know that, this is the kind of agenda that happens on college campuses, and the kind of, twisting that happens. And I think it's important to be honest about that.
I think we have another question over here. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ari. So I've been struggling with this ever since I first started, got into Palestinian activism. But my dad's whole side of the family is very, very evangelical Christian, and they think that if you don't support Israel, you're hellbound, and I'm not even exaggerating one single bit. If you do not support Israel, you're going to hell. And he listens to preachers who talk about how Palestine doesn't exist, and it's never existed, and Palestinians don't exist. And so I've always struggled trying to help my dad and also my dad's family understand that that's just not how it is. It's just such a warped view of reality, and I don't know. Some advice maybe, because also sometimes when I'm surrounded by my dad's family, I'm do I even say anything when they start talking about Israel? Because otherwise I'm going to get ambushed, and It's just a mess. So yeah, that's my piece.
No, I completely understand. And for so long, it was so triggering and so hard to even hear that point of view. But I think I really let myself like position into that and really hear their side, you know, because I think it's important. And I think, you know, the Holocaust is something that comes up every time. And it's so warranted, you know. I believe in that trauma and that all the things that happened and why, you know, they need, what their story and their position and all that stuff, right? But it also, the way I flip the script kind of is that, right, the Holocaust happened, and now you think it's okay to do those things to Palestinians, right? And so it's just, and that's part of the rhetoric that comes up all the time, is that no one is anti-Semitic. No one is saying that, you know, you don't deserve anything because of the Holocaust. Like the whole world, you know, grieved with that. And so I don't think, and you know, the neo-Nazis and all these things that's happening, it's like, we're anti all those things. And so it just doesn't make sense that when you've gone through so much trauma yourselves, to re-administer that to people. You know what I mean? And that's fundamentally how I think about it. And it really boils down to that. It's like, aren't we supposed to learn from our mistakes? Aren't we supposed to, why is history repeating itself? You know? And so that's how I've thought about it. But I think it's also important to engage and to talk to people who feel really directly impacted on the other side, to hear their voice and give them space in that way too.
I wonder, because there are Palestinian Christians, so like, and who are active, who do center Palestine, and so maybe potentially having them engage with, like, you know, Palestinian Christians who are directly affected by the occupation. There's Bethlehem, that's basically where Jesus was born, but it's a totally walled-off city. And then there's also, I know, I'm not sure where your family lives, but definitely in Portland, there are a lot of churches that kind of take like more of a liberation theology, you know, tone, where they address the issue of Palestine in a way that centers Palestinians and really, you know, wants, you know, their churches to not have like HP in their offices. And I know they were probably one of the bigger supporters of our BDS campaigns, who definitely came and helped us. And so I could potentially connect you to them, and maybe they would be able to provide better resources. But I think just telling the stories of Palestinian Christians, like they struggle too every day and are directly affected by Israel. So.
I mean, I can't really speak too much. I don't really have much advice, to be honest. I've been around, my family's so pro-Palestine, of course, but yeah, just going off what Jenna said, I mean, the people who are being oppressed are the Christians as well. It's not just centered around supporting Jewish people, but it's also just your people are also being oppressed. You know, the Christians are Palestinian. So I think it's just coming up with those resources and directing them kind of like in the conversation, and educating yourself as well too, so you have kind of like a civil dialogue with them. It doesn't have to like be very hostile. I know they'll probably like attack you if you say something, but just kind of be prepared. Just educate yourself too about the situation with Christianity in Palestine as well.
Thank you.
I think we have time for like one more question, right?
Thank you. So going back to organizing on campuses, I've been organizing myself, and it's useful to know, sometimes reflect on what tactics or strategies we're trying that didn't work. So just asking if there's anything, tactic or strategy that any of you have tried that didn't work out how you were expecting, and what you learned from that?
I feel like avoiding events that involve normalization. You'll get approached a lot by organizations like J Street who want to do events with you, and they'll you like for that, but I like for that, but let's all hold hands and forget the occupation. It's really important to not engage in anything like that, because we're pretty strict. We have our points and we stick to them. We've thought about doing panels where we have their own debates, but I feel like we've never really had or given opportunity for that. We've been pretty straightforward with our beliefs.
I think one tactic that didn't really work was engaging with other BDS campaigns on campus. At PSU, there was a fossil fuel divestment happening around the same time. And we thought, the person that we knew who was heading it seemed pretty down for Palestine. But then when push came to shove and we decided to do our campaign, he totally just started to kind of freak out about having this campaign. And we wanted it to go a certain way. They suggested it go another way, and it was just not working. And so that was a little bit disappointing, because I think they did successfully pass their divestment bill, and then when it came to Palestine, that organization that we thought could help us just kind of fell apart. So really understanding the different campaigns on campus and those people. And I think another big part of it was Stand With Us. I don't know how big of a presence it is at Oregon State, but at Portland State, they were pretty good about intimidating some student organizations as well as student senate members. And so that's something to be conscious of, and I think that's sort of why we failed in connecting with that other divestment campaign.
So you're asking what tactics were not the best?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. Super at OSU is pretty new. It's only been around for 1 year and a half now. But I think, going back with what I said, is coming together and trying to not be upfront about what everyone kind of truly believes, with halal, and trying to do that passive, unity is just not, it doesn't work long term. And I think that you have to be upfront. And that's what we learned, we kept trying to have those conversations, but it's we weren't seeing eye to eye. So that's when you kind of branch out and kind of stick to your own, you build that constitution, you build this is what we're here for, this is what we're doing, and make that clear from the beginning. So I think we kind of rose and we're okay, are we going to be BDS? Yes, we're going to be BDS. But it kind of came as a progression. And so people were kind of always confused on where we were. And so I think and that was because, it was 4 people in the beginning organizing. So, and we're all new, we're learning. And so it came, as time went on, we started to realize we have to be very strong and united front about what we're here for and what we're trying to do. And so, and I think one of the main mistakes we might have done, we did in the beginning, was not building enough presence and connections with other organizations on campus, because I think that's where we could have really been really strong in the beginning. And so we've done that over time, but I think really coming out of the gate with meeting with other people and saying, hey, we're doing this thing, and we really want, that personal invitation is really important to other people. Personally inviting them and say, we want you to be a part of this. That's how you build it, because at the end of the day, organizing is about relationship building. That's what it is. And so it's about building trust. And we're so broken, all of us, and our communities are broken. They're broken up, and so we don't trust each other. We don't even trust our own people, and we don't trust other people, people of color. This phrase that's thrown out all the time. It's like we're so fragmented. So it's like, how are we really building that trust and bringing us together is something that I didn't realize until a little after. And I realized, like, okay, this is what needs to be focused on. So, yeah.
I think we can take actually some more questions. So maybe if you have a note card or question.
Hi, thank you guys a lot for your words and wisdom. I just wanted to respond. Oh, she left. I had a thought about the faculty question. As an adjunct faculty, it's a pretty precarious job. So I think that the strength lies within the tenured faculty in those situations. And so thinking about, as tenured faculty, how can that influence the research dollars and where the research dollars are going? And then as adjunct faculty, working within your associations, like the American Studies Association, you can go to those conferences and you can organize in those ways. And then, obviously then connect with the student organizations that are also working for the same goals.
So, yeah, I guess that was the question. But at that point, we wanted to, end the panel discussion because we have someone else that needs to get going. But
Wait, can I say something really fast?
please, sure.
This is just a general note. I just got a text, and I just want to say, also recognize that usually in organizing, it's always women, specifically women of color, and that spearhead these things. And this is something that was mentioned earlier. And so it's about, when I say, power and privilege, I'm talking about, even, where's your privilege in your gender and your sexuality and your race, and taking up that space is really important because there's a lot of people who don't have that space. So when can you step in, step back also is really important. I thought it was important to say.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you all for coming again, and another round of applause. Thank you.